Wow. I'm sorry about that. So first of all, that was the wrong intro. And again, I'm working out these new systems here. And I so what happened, just to yes, I am. And now I'm struggling with trying. This is just such an inauspicious way to. There we go. All right. Take three. So yeah, I'm dealing with new systems, and I haven't done this Friday show on this computer yet. So I have an open for the Sunday show and the Friday show. And the Friday show open is on my other computer, which I can I just like vent a little. I fucking hate Uranus in my sixth house. It is wreaked havoc with my tech shit since invading my sixth house like kudzu or red algae. That's what Uranus has been like. So I apologize for the botchy beginning. The good news is I'll have the right video for Sunday night, but I need to hopefully resolve the Friday video by next Friday, which means I got to get it off my other computer. You don't want to hear it. Nobody likes excuses, right? So I apologize for that. We got a great show planned for you. I got my wing cat right here, right there. You want to say hi to everybody? Yeah, you're taking the morning off, aren't you? There he is, Astro Cat, Jasper. Got a great show planned for you today. We're going to have a new friend, and I guess officially a member of Chattaria, since she was at our event on in October, and she went to the after party, and then she came again when we had our get together here at my place on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. So that's Melissa Aguirre. I hope I'm pronouncing it in the correct pronunciation. And she's terrific. You're going to be blown away by her. And to me, it's just another example of just how smart and how switched on like the stream of people that are connected to this show are. I mean, I could easily go into that chat right now and pluck 5 people out and they could be guests on the show. That's how switched on and amazing you guys are. Like earlier in the week, I tapped on Benito's shoulder and like, hey man, can you come on the show and talk about the rail strike? Because you got inside baseball. He's like, sure, no problem. Right. And he's, part of our Chattarian family. And Melissa is now too. So she's going to be on the show. I had a reading with her yesterday and boy, was I blown away. I was so blown away. And I had one of those 2-4 splenic projector moments thinking about what I wanted to do for today's show, because I didn't really have a guest lined up. And I thought, yeah, let's get into some dark shit. Right. Because there's some things I'm looking at and working on in my consciousness, my psyche. And then I think it might have been around 9:30 last night. Like, why don't you see if Melissa can come on the show? Because I was just really blown away by her story. And she's going to be joining us here in about 7 minutes. And you'll be blown away too. And the thing I really like about, kind of this sort of turn and angle is that it's a really positive story. It's a positive story. It's an upbeat story. And I think it's a story for the holidays. It's a Sagittarian story of expansion and hope and faith and wisdom, because that's the season we're in right now. So what I want to do before we bring her on, she'll be here in about 6 minutes. What I want to do is I want to just do a little quick shout out to our sponsor of the show, which you guys know is True Hemp Science. And I just had a few drops of the old 19. Hey 19. Did he name this after Steely Dan? Hey 19? I don't know. But I'm sure happy he made it. So this is my new thing. This is my new THS thing. And I showed it yesterday. It's right there. And I had my recommended 8 drops before the show. So it should be kicking in right about now. Let's take a little journey over to the THS site. Maybe Chris can do a THS 1138. So one of the reasons I like talking about his products is because they work. And another reason I like talking about his products is because he is connected to our ecosystem. And another official, unofficial member of Chattaria. And I've known Chris since about, I think around 2015. So going on 7 years. And I've seen him go through a number of iterations and really put a lot of effort into getting this CBD business off the ground. So the timing was right. We decided to partner up, and the response has been tremendous. So if you're interested in trying out really high quality, efficacious CBD, this is your place. This is your one-stop shop. And you can get CBD for sleep. You get CBD that's stimulating. The Hey 19 is definitely stimulating. You can get CBD for your pet. You can get topicals. And the great thing is either Chris or Marcia can answer all your CBD questions if you need them, either via email, and they have a shop front in Austin. All that information is right here on this page. If you are listening to the show, if you're listening to this in the podcast side of things, go to trampscience.com/ref/23 and just type in 15MINS and you get free product thrown in. $150 or more, you have to spend $100, which is nothing these days. You can drop $100. Like I remember dropping $100 at dinner was a big deal. Now it's like, oh, we only paid $100 for that? Man, that's great. Right. So $100 investment in your health is nothing. Anything that can keep you out of the 12th house, out of the hospital zone, trust me, it's worth it. It's really worth it. So if you spend $100, you get free product, $150 or more, you get free shipping. So there you go. A little True Hemp Science for you right there. Okay. So we have about 3 minutes before Melissa joins us today. I hope everybody's doing well as we hurtle towards the holidays and all the things that go along with it. And I hope that you all have wonderful connections with family and friends, no matter where you lean in on this thing. You know, I think it's it's definitely on the pagan side. And they if you really get into it, right, you'll find some interesting connections to some interesting people who are kind of stand-ins for the Jesus story, but they wanted to have the Jesus story overlap on the winter solstice. And so they put it there, right? Just like they wanted to overlap the resurrection story on Easter. So, there's an Easter being the first day of spring. So, these are all events that are connected to much older traditions. And Christmas itself is connected to Nimrod, believe it or not. Maybe I'll do a Friday FARc. Maybe I'll do it next week and we'll go down the Christmas rabbit hole. I think it'll be a good show to go down the Christmas rabbit hole. Let's see. We got people chatting in my 11th house. Telegram page. I think I did a webinar one time on the actual occultic roots of Christmas, and it was a good one. We'll pull it out next week and get into it. But right now, let's not waste any more time. Let's bring our guest on because I'm so excited to talk about her work. Let me get my headphones on. There you are.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Doing well. How about yourself?
Good. So your camera is cutting off the beautiful top portion of your head.
Can you see me now?
A little bit better. A little bit better.
How's that?
That's a little bit better because you got great hair.
Thank you. I try. I like the big hair. I don't know if it's a Texas thing or now that I'm in Texas, right? Bigger the hair.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I think
Or
everything.
wait, closer to God. Isn't that the thing they say?
I think so. That makes sense. We can definitely justify that. So let's talk a little bit about how we connected and then kind of get into your personal story a little bit because there's still blanks in your life that I haven't been filled in on, right? So you and I met at the event here in the Hill Country, and you were just a real dynamo at that event. And it's just like, wow, I love this girl's energy. And then you came by afterwards, and you hung out at the house. And then you came by on Saturday after Thanksgiving, brought your dad, got to know you a little bit more. And then you and I had a reading yesterday, and we really got into it. We really got into your chart. And I'm like, wow, this is really amazing. A lot of these angles and what you're working on. And then I found out more about your story. And as I was telling people before you came on, I had a different idea for today's show. And I was thinking, okay, I'm going to go down a really dark rabbit hole. And then around 9:30 last night, it's like, why don't you ask Melissa if she'll be on the show? I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And so I'm like, it's late. It's 10:30 at night. I don't know what she's doing tomorrow, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I texted you and you were like, yeah, I'm in. So that's our genesis. That's how we met. And I've known you for maybe 2 months now.
Yeah.
But let's find out more about you. And you were originally born in Michigan, and you matriculated to Texas. What brought you to Texas?
Well, my husband's in the military, and I was born in Michigan, then lived in Chicago area for about 7 years, so early childhood, then moved to North Carolina. And my husband is actually my high school sweetheart. So he's a year older than me. He joined the military. He was in basic training and all that while I was a senior in high school. Right after high school, I went to Asheville, North Carolina, and that's where I learned about yoga and a lot of my stuff began. I was practicing and all that stuff before, but so he's in the military, I'm in Asheville, and I did what every person in love would want to do is I'm going to drop everything, get married. I'm 19 years old, and I'm going to move to Fort Bragg because he was stationed at Fort Bragg. And so I ended up dropping out of college and moving to Fort Bragg. So we were there for about 4 years and then moved to Texas in 2015. And I kind of joke, we're an anomaly because we've been able to stay in Texas. He did go to Florida in 2019, and we did a geographical relocation, basically where he was there and then I was here, but I was going back and forth. And so when that happened, we were able to arrange it to make him come back to Texas because at the time I had all these yoga studios. My business was thriving in Texas, so I couldn't go with him. And we've somehow managed to still be here and hopefully going to stay a little bit longer.
So he's still in the military right now?
Yes. Yep. He's in the Army.
He's in the Army. Right. So is he a lifer?
Yeah, probably. That's the plan. He has only 8 years left. We're over halfway through, so we're getting there.
And what's his rank?
So he commissioned to an officer in 2021. So he's now a first lieutenant, but he's been in for 12 years.
Okay. And has he been deployed overseas?
Yes, he was deployed in 2012, and then he's gone on different other missions, but the big deployment was in 2012, which while he was deployed, that's actually when I got my yoga teacher training.
Interesting. So, how was that for you when he was away? That must have been pretty intense, but maybe the yoga helped out a little bit.
The yoga was huge because at that time I didn't know what exactly to do with my life. So I've always been a writer. When I was 7 years old, I started writing regularly in a journal. So I have journals since being 7 years old until basically now. But I kind of slowed down once I got married. I wasn't by myself at night anymore because I used to journal every day though. So what I wanted to do was be an author and a writer and a poet. But yoga came into my life when I was 15. My best friend was killed in a car accident with another really close friend of mine, which I was already struggling with mental health issues before that. So that exasperated everything. And at that time, also just different stuff with body image, eating disorder, all this type of stuff that definitely comes with trauma. And yoga was something originally I used in a way, I look back and I was really using it, abusing my body to stay thin. And it was almost this control thing. And so I had kind of an unhealthy relationship with it to begin with. But what was profound is I always felt so different after doing it. But I did it every morning, my junior and senior year in high school. A 15, 25-minute practice, Rodney Yee on a DVD. And then when I got to Asheville, that's when I got to start doing yoga in person and everything started to shift. And I realized that my writing actually, when I became a teacher, one of the gifts and things I'm known for is that the way that I language classes, I'm very poetic. And I started to see how my language and writing became a superpower in the way I teach yoga. So I went through my own transformation and healing journey with yoga, but then now for the past 10 plus years, I've been sharing that with others.
So you've had a couple of books that you've written and have been published. One is Innate Design, the other is from Desert to Garden. You want to show them?
So this is the Innate Design, and the story of this. So I partnered with, let's see the glare. Let's make sure there's no glare so y'all can see. This story started with an Army medicine physician who my husband worked with. My husband is in the medical field in the military. So there was a physician he was working with, and this physician was really interested in holistic interventions. And we got into a conversation about the chakras. And he was blown away by it, really interested, wanted to dive in deeper. And as we would meet for coffee just to talk about it. And, I had the wild idea of let's write a book together. And I was surprised, but he was on board. And we ended up collaborating and writing this book together to frame the chakras as an intervention, a lifestyle intervention for the modern patient. So the journey of the book, it kind of talks about the medical system and kind of a larger landscape of it all, but then each chapter goes into the chakras to understand the psycho-energetic emotional construct and how that affects our physical health. And then there's tools, practices all throughout the book. So it's a great resource.
And then you have From Desert to Garden, and that's is that a gardening ag book? What does that look like?
So it is actually a poetry anthology. So
cool.
Yeah. So From Deserts to Gardens is poetry. Right. And the concept is going from deserts, right? Barren, empty, and how healing, like really, because a lot of the poetry, some of it's really dark, some of it's really healing. And I talk a lot about transformation. And so that's where the title comes from. But what I did is there's journaling in it because I'm a big proponent of inquiry and self-inquiry, because I believe that when we do self-inquiry, we can cultivate more self-discovery. So there's questions and prompts throughout the book that invite you to go deeper into your own reflection with the poems.
Right. Cool. Excellent. So one of the upsides of marrying young is that you can grow together. And one of the downsides with marrying young is that you can grow apart. And so obviously you've grown together. And that's a really fascinating journey that you've been on since your 19th year. Did you find that you were a bit of an anomaly amongst your age group when you decided to make that choice?
Oh, for sure. I mean, to be honest with you, I got engaged my senior year in high school. Wow. So imagine I come into school and I have a ring on my finger and I'm excited, right? And my close friends were supportive, of course, but a lot of people were very much like, what? And even my teachers were like, and my parents, granted, as a parent now, I can understand that that's really young to make such a permanent or big, like it's a heavy, big decision to make at such a young age. But something that I know you and I have talked about, because I'm into Vedic astrology. And what has helped me understand myself is when I was 15, I started my Saturn dasha. Mm-hmm. So then for those who don't know, dashas are the cycles of our lives, right? So they work with our chart, and specifically in Vedic, it awakens karmic experiences. And you guys are all probably familiar with what Saturn does. So of course, all the mental health stuff, and then losing my best friend, and then some traumas that followed with all of that. I'm basically old when I'm young, and I'll be young when I'm old, but I was always more of this, like, I don't know. I guess having fun was not natural to me, right? I wanted to be married. I wanted to start a business. Like I was not into what a lot of people my age were into. So it was isolating at times, but looking back, I can see the evolution and I'm grateful for it.
Well, you also have that Saturn in Aquarius in the first house, and that's very much indicative of growing up quickly and taking on more responsibility when you're younger too. So from the Western side of things, that also makes sense. All right, let's cut to the chase. Let's get into your yoga work on the base. When did that start to happen?
So when I dropped out of college, moved to Fort Bragg, obviously, well, actually, let's backtrack. Okay. So my husband's deploying, and I went to a yoga class. It was my regular yoga class I was going to, and the teacher, she printed up an article because she knew about, my relationship, and that, my husband Adam was leaving and all this stuff. And so she brought me an article about how yoga can help with post-traumatic stress. And when and she printed it, so I was holding this paper, looking at this article, and I was like, this is what I'm here to do. This is what I'm going to do with my life, because I really struggled with seeing how, like, am I going to be a school teacher? What do I do? But I don't want to go to school. Like, I don't want to get my degree. So what am I going to do when he comes back and I'm ready to go to Bragg? So when I saw that, it felt like destiny. And I decided, and she said, you should pursue yoga teacher training. And in a way, I think for a lot of us, we have those things where we're like, oh, I can never do that. Or I don't know if I'm enough to do that, or whatever our baggage or inner dialogue is. I was hesitant, but it was also this like, okay, if this is meant to be, it's going to be. And I was really surprised because my parents ended up paying for that for Christmas for me. Yeah, I mean, cool. It was so easy, like how it all unfolded. So getting trained while I was in my 200-hour teacher training, I mean, I did my project around working with the military and post-traumatic stress. When he came back, of course, one thing if you're married, you understand your partner is not your student. They're not your client, right? So it wasn't really about bringing it to him, but I was searching for job opportunities at Fort Bragg, and I got the privilege to teach yoga for the Warrior Transition Battalion. So I started on Fort Bragg teaching the Warrior Transition Battalion, and then I landed a contract with the Wounded Warrior Project. And they funded a series that I delivered to the Wounded Warrior Project. We did that consistently for a few years. I got to lead retreats for the Wounded Warrior Project, and then events. And then just through referral, a lot of my clients, because I ended up opening a studio with somebody. So at the studio, a lot of my one-on-one clients, our group classes, it was all military affiliated. So that's where it really began.
And how long ago was that?
That was in 2013 to 2015.
So you've been at this a while.
Yes. Yeah. It's actually there's a lot of full circle in my story. So my husband joined the military, became a medic. He came to Fort Sam here in Texas, and he was in 232, the med battalion here, to become a soldier medic. And ironically, my more recent work, and we'll kind of go chronological here in a moment, but just to share a full circle, sure. The community that I've served ended up being the exact battalion that he was part of. And we've had a few of those where it goes full circle, where it's like, I'm getting to serve where he once was. So that's been a really powerful thing in our paths of seeing, in a way, of how we're working together, right? Or just how it comes together.
Right. That's interesting. Very interesting. So 10 years, And why don't we do this? Why don't we bring up a picture, one of the pictures that you sent me? And this is, I guess you're in front here, and these are your yoga peeps, right there.
Yeah.
And
So
that's on the base.
So this is at Fort Sam. Sometimes I will lead PT for different companies. So within the battalion, there's different companies. So I'll go in and lead PT for, sometimes we do battalion wide, then sometimes it's for the companies. But what they were wanting to do, this specific picture, what they wanted to see was, does yoga improve ACFT outcomes? And that's the PT test for the Army. And
Right.
so we were working with that, and we were finding that it was affecting and improving not just their ACFT scores, but also it was affecting their classroom, like their grades. Because remember, these are students, right? They're in school, they're in a training school. And kind of to backtrack how this happened was in 2019, I opened the first yoga studio on a military base. It's never happened. And that was a really big deal where we were serving military families, and then it was open to personnel as well. It actually sparked because military spouses kind of are the invisible force within the force. And military spouses deal a lot with identity issues, community, and connection, or like job opportunities. So we created programs to really help them. But then it evolved where the different units were going, hey, wait a second, this is really cool. Can we get you to come here and really be part of program development? So I was part of Gladiator program. It was a program where we worked with the AIT students, specifically those who had injuries. Right now in the military, what they're seeing a lot of is lower limb injuries because, you know, when we were kids, and even especially generations before, we were out running around and doing a bunch of stuff. So our bone density was actually stronger back then than it is today. Kids today coming in don't have as strong a bone density because what are kids today doing? They're on their phones.
They're sedentary, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So, but the problem is the military hasn't really evolved basic training to work with that. So they're putting all this load and all this stuff happening to these young soldiers where they're coming to the schools with a lot of injuries, and it's costing the military a ton of money. It's creating a lot of issues. The metrics are really problematic. So we ended up creating a pilot program, and it was to address those soldiers with injuries and, of course, suicide prevention, mental health, all of that. And in that, what they do now, and they still continue this, is twice a week, there's yoga for PT, and then they have access to a physical therapist, and they also work with the aquatic center. So this integrative program, they were able to get metrics back this summer, and we found out that our program saved the Army $26 million.
Wow.
And we brought attrition to 2%. So it was I think it was 16% before we started. Right. So that was huge. It was the second study ever done on yoga in the Army. And seeing that kind of efficacy, it has really propelled within TRADOC, so training and regulation. So this relates to basic training and the initial military schools, that yoga is an imperative component to apply into the military. Mm-hmm. So this, what's great about pictures like this is it starts to socialize it, because as you can imagine, people in the military, the younger ones are way more open. Right. But, when you get to the E5s and above, there's kind of this, like, what's happening to my Army? What are you doing here? This picture, like, we're doing yoga. But one thing I've learned is it's about the language that we use to help them understand why we do what we do. So I do a lot of education. So I have schools and programs within the military where I'm training and equipping leadership so they can convey and articulate why this is relevant. And we're sensitive about the word yoga because for some people there's a religious connotation to it.
Yeah, that's like really weird. It's like somebody up at our conference it was Darlena, who does human design, and she was going to do an event at a yoga studio up in the Dallas area, and the woman who has the studio kind of changed the whole thing and called it like Swedish yoga or something like that, right? To make sure that people who came, or I think she may have even called it Christian yoga, I'm not sure, but like there's this weird thing going on where yoga is demonized because, it's not Christian, or, you're doing the poses of animals, and, there's this weird, kind of, hybridization of these animal gods, and it's just weird stuff. Right. So, I mean, that's kind of a crazy thing that people are having to deal with in your profession. So you really had to craft this in a way that people were not going to be freaked out by. So what kind of language should you use to replace that, or insert?
Well, there's two things. One is I just want to acknowledge the reason, like, why is it that there's a religious connotation or there's this fear around it, is because you got to go back to the late 1800s when yoga came here. So in India, they were really wanting to bring yoga to the West because they looked at it as physics. Yoga has always been physics. And if that's a whole other realm we could go into, is how is yoga physics and working with energy and the morphogenic field and consciousness and all of that. So they always looked at it as physics, but the universities in the West were rejecting bringing them here because they refused to divorce spirituality and science. Because you got to remember, in the 1800s, especially, I mean, it was this big separation. We know that with astrology, we saw that ongoing. So what happened is they got an opportunity to come they wanted to bring yoga to the US. So there was an opportunity for them to bring yoga here, and it was at a World Religion Summit. And of course they're like, whatever, yes, let's go. We need to get it to the West because the universities are rejecting this. So they come, and because it was plugged into a World Religion Summit from the very get-go, I think that was a big moment where the socialization around what yoga is, it got put into whether Buddhism and of course, Buddhism comes from yoga, right? Mm-hmm. It's one of the 7 Indian philosophies, but it got put into this religious category. And so it was socialized and kind of stayed in that for decades. And it's really in the past 20 years that we've been able to start breaking this down and go, hey, yoga is a human birthright. Hey, it's mind-body medicine. It's these mechanics. When you look at research, so kind of how I frame it to them, you look at research, because there's so many versions of both meditation and yoga. The way that they do research on this, because there's so many differences, right? There's too many variables. It's very hard to get the same thing for everything. So what they do is they look at traits. They say, all right, yoga is movement, relaxation, breath, and welcoming presence. So anything that is movement, relaxation, breath, welcoming presence is categorized as yoga. With meditation, it's breath, relaxation, welcoming presence. And so when we look at those traits, we can use language that works with different organizations or whatever, to help them understand what it is. It's all yoga. It comes down to semantics, right? And just communicating that. So my approach, what I've done and what I continue to do is I look at the metrics of what the Army is dealing with, or, because I also work at the Air Force or working with police departments, et cetera. You look at their metrics on what the problem is. Okay, so you're having high cost utilization on behavioral health. Well, so in the military, if this company has way more than this other company, what's going on with the leadership there? What's going on with the climate there? And then bringing in strategies that are proactive. A big piece of my work is socializing proactive health. So instead of being reactive, where we go, okay, we're having this issue, let's try to combat this with, A, B, C, D. If we socialize the mind-body components into their way of life, into PT, into, it's just part of culture, we actually decrease the problems on the back end. So, and that's a lot of like with the military, go back to 2012. One of my dreams and visions were like, and that I've been praying circles around for years, is that with deployments, right? Part of readiness is using this stuff before. So we create neural patterns of regulation. So it's in the body. Right. And that's going to make them more resilient when they go to war or they're in high stress situations. And then when they come back, what are we doing for recovery? How do we regulate the nervous system? Because right now there's not, when my husband came back, after we did the whole thing at the field and they came in, he had to go and report. So we ran to Walmart so we could get a Gatorade for the first time. after 8 months, right? He's like, I just want a Gatorade. So we go, but he had to go report. And then the next day he had a report. There was not I think they went and played paintball for their recovery, which
Yeah, it's like, it's just a playtime version of the thing you just got out of, right?
right. And so
Yeah.
they don't have these strategies that are regulation. And my hope is that we can thread, you don't have to call it yoga. So, and this is something the yoga industry it's very divided on. You got the yoga industry saying, like, half of it going, we have to uphold the language, but then you also have to remember you can use other language and then plant the seed of yoga. Everybody knows we're doing yoga, but
right.
There's the access barrier of people who, with the religious stuff, you have to be inclusive. And in order for us to pass teachings on, we have to maintain the relevance to, especially the culture, if we want to help people with this. And that's my mission, is to help people reclaim themselves. That's my mission.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's about how do we bring this into regulation, but it takes time. Government is slow. Luckily, I'm very Saturn, so I have the patience and
you have the
resilience.
patience to hang in there. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, right now they're the Army just came out with something called a TMR, which is tactical mobility and recovery. And it's actually an offshoot of a lot of stuff that I started. They took the drill sergeants that I trained and some of the things that I did, and they blended their stuff, and they're moving forward with a lot of this within. And, we'll see my future and all of that. I'm just allowing things to unfold, but
right.
Based off of a lot of the data and the impact we had at Fort Sam. And I've done keynote speaking and I've gone and advised different units, but they're wanting to make it something that is a regular part of the front end. So I'm very excited for what's to unfold in these next 10 years for the military.
So how far up the chain of command have you gone with being a yoga practitioner? Like, have you spent any time working with COs on getting them into a regular practice?
So in the military, I have star awards from generals. I do work a lot with top leadership. Yeah. The problem is that they all, the further up you go, the further away you are from boots on the ground.
Right.
And so, and also it's a big cultural difference. You got to remember, these people are 20, 30 years older than all the ones on the ground. So there is this disconnection that happens where I see a lot of motivated leadership, but how to, pass it to the bottom, it's a challenge. So I actually work with both. I like to work with bottom and top. Right. So because the ones at the top are the ones who are going to say yes and start to give permission, but it's the ones at the bottom who are actually doing it. And so, I mean, all the way, I've had different people share testimonies of the impact that my teachings or experiences with me have been, but, and I think that it's just going to continue to spread, hopefully, because it really, especially in the military, what leadership does, they are modeling what it is to be a soldier, right?
Right. And I think that's always that's like a moving river. That's always changing. It changes with the times, it changes with the theater, all that stuff. I'm a little bit older than you. So I grew up in a period that was very anti-war. So when I was 8, 9 years old, it was, the kind of the latter part of the 60s. And the anti-war movement was really, really big. And so that made an impact on me as a kid. And ultimately, I'm not anti-conflict, but I am anti-war for very specific reasons that have nothing to do with the soldiers and their lives. So my hope would be that the people that you started to work with 10 years ago would matriculate upwards, and that their consciousness and their decision-making process would then change our relationship ultimately to war, and that we could figure things out in a different kind of way than we've been doing for the last, I don't know, since World War I, right? Yeah. Have you noticed any of your kind of initial students begin to make that move upwards, and have they stayed in touch with the work, and how have you tracked their development?
Yeah, well, once people, I don't really follow too much, like a lot. I mean, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of soldiers
Right.
over the past decades, but I think that it's a cultural thing that's starting to shift, and seeing them carry it on. I mean, it definitely influences, because a lot of people don't know what they don't know. And I think, the hardest thing about war, and when we look at our entire human existence, it's kind of like pain. I feel like in a way, some of these things are inevitable. But if we can prevent our soldiers from being used up and just recycled and pushed aside, because at the end of the day, we know the realities. Like, I don't want to say we're pawns, but in a way, it's like you take orders and you do what you need to do. You don't ask questions. But these are real humans with depth and purpose and meaning and impact that they're here to bring, just like the rest of us.
Right.
And anybody who chooses to serve in the military, they want to serve, right? And there's a specific energy in this group of people of just the humility to serve, mostly, right? So my hope and prayer is that we can prevent what we've seen in the past 20 years, what has happened, and stop just, recycling, or not just 20 years. It's been, I mean, really since World War I, where we're not taking care of the very people that are the most important asset of the military. The most important asset of the military is our soldier, because, they're the ones making the decisions behind any type of operations and for everything to carry on. So my heartbreak is seeing the metrics, and over time, I mean, even with the VA, what has, like, the data with all that. So how can we help people where they learn their own inner healing pharmacy, the tools within themselves, so they know how to regulate, and they also have agency, because it's a choice, right? If it's not for everybody. And I think about, I'm going to bring some yoga in. So the Bhagavad Gita is all about war. And it's a profound moment between Krishna and Arjuna, where Arjuna is going, I'm scared. I want to run. I don't want to die, but I also don't want my family to die. And if you really take to heart what's happening in the Bhagavad Gita and listen to what Krishna is saying, is that detachment. He's teaching that in life, we have these karmic experiences, these hard things that we can't control, but your karmic action is the highest. I always think about it, it's like the highest good of the now moment. Like the choices we make is our karmic, it's our karma, right? This is why I love Vedic astrology, because you can see, like, when my best friend died, that was a karmic experience in my life. It was transformative. I had no control. But what I did have was the choice and how to navigate. Now, at the time, I was not conscious to a lot of things. But imagine if we have these tools up front and we're training ourselves in regulation, self-connection, soul connection, that when hardship or pain arrives in our life, like the example with Arjuna, that we're able to go, I'm not attached. Like, I don't identify. My identity is not this. There's no death, right? Like, there's all these things that is taught, and also learning how to regulate in the face of danger and struggle. So when it's over, we can still be intact. And this goes into the issue when people are getting out of the military, that they feel like they don't have a self-identity. So how do we still show up, do our karmic duty as a soldier, or for those listening in your life, but still know that you are multidimensional and there's so many facets to you? And that's a big piece of my hope, is that this helps them connect with their unique essence and their identity, but also the human weapon system, right? The power that's within us, versus identifying that my power comes from out there.
Right. So these people in this picture, they're active duty, right? They're active service members. Okay. Yep. How does this affect, you talked a little bit about morale. How does an experience like this affect the group consciousness? I mean, do you see them in this environment over a period of time grow together and sort of develop more of a sense of oneness by using these techniques?
Well, so each of these groups, they're together for a couple of weeks, or I guess maybe 12 weeks, 21 weeks. It depends on the training they're in. But so, in a sense, they do cultivate morale through these experiences where everybody comes together. I think what I find as far as how consciousness and connection happen this is one of the only places where there's agency and choosing, because it's the way I teach. So I give options. I do a lot for inquiry where they're getting to connect with themselves or choose something for themselves in that moment. And there's a lightheartedness, which I think is a big relief. I think there's a time and place because there's time to be serious, but also do we give time for softening? Because again, the nervous system needs both. And, we joke, they always float out of, yoga in the mornings. And it was so successful that the military filmed me there's 8 yoga classes on divots that different units or anybody can use. And I know there's a handful that use them across the country.
Right.
Put it up on the projector and then they can use it. They can practice yoga for PT in the morning. So, and it's based off of their own regulations. So I created yoga programs based off of their regulations of 7-22. So it's all in their language. So it's comfortable. It's something they can relate to, but overall, it definitely, when we looked at the metrics, people were improving, or some of the load on different systems were decreasing. So that can, I'm only with them for that hour. I'm not there throughout the day. So I can't speak to what happens when I'm not there.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that there's something really special, especially when we end the class and everybody just kind of, we just kind of linger in that presence in that moment. So,
and you breathe together and all that stuff. So you being a teachers always have their eyes on the student. Have you ever seen somebody and said, wow, you've got it, right? You have something, whatever that something is, either flexibility, an innate kind of relationship to form. Like, I'm sure you've seen that inside of your classes.
Yeah. And actually, I have a very different approach than a lot of the Western yoga styles out there. I'm not really into performance or form. I'm more about function and self-connection. So poses to me, it's not about how it looks. It's about how it feels. And the essence I get or the experience I have is, wow, this person has such a good spirit, such a good heart. Or they're so aware. And after class, usually people will talk with me or I get emails and different stuff and just the impact or the reflection of it. One of my favorite experiences was I had a soldier so we did the practice and after he comes up to me and he wanted to show me how he's like, what do you do about touching your toes? Because I can't touch my toes. And I said, well, first of all, it's not about touching your toes, but or it was something along those lines. And then he said, well, look, and he goes and he touches his toes. And I'm like, I'm confused. I'm looking at him like, what are you doing? What's going on? And he looks up and his eyes are like, oh my gosh, I just touched my toes. And it was this funny moment of where we have perceived beliefs about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And until we what happens is obviously in the practice, it opens the body. So we did a lot of stuff where it made it accessible. But when we have a belief that I can't do something, because everything in yoga physically is a metaphor. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's all a metaphor. So if I believe I can't, then I perpetuate that belief. But so it was funny because he was holding on to this belief, but when he did it and he was like, oh my gosh, and just walked off like kind of this, I touched my toes. I can touch my toes. Right. And so it built in that the physical, it's efficacy, but it's deeper that our beliefs often hold us back. But if you just try or you lean in, like see what unfolds for you.
Yeah. Yeah. There was this movie back in the 1970s. ABC used to do these movies of the week, and they weren't like movies that were produced and then released into theaters. They would actually make these movies and they would be direct for television. And ABC would have the ABC movie of the week. And one of the movies was called Tribes. And it was with, you probably don't know who he is, Jan Michael Vincent. Do you know Jan Michael Vincent at all? No. Okay. Going a little ways back. So Jan Michael Vincent plays kind of a Dharma bum. He's like a surfer. And he winds up going into the Marines. But he's not your ordinary surfer. He's into yoga and meditation. And so he starts to do these things during basic training. And his basic training officer is played by this guy, Darren McGavin, who used to do a bunch of stuff with ABC. And so he's like taking Jan Michael Vincent on because Jan Michael Vincent is doing things that theoretically he shouldn't be doing. Like they used to have this, I think they probably still do this exercise where you have to hold out these buckets of sand, right? And so he would put himself in a trance and just he would be able to hold it forever because he went into trance on the bucket drill. And so then what happened is that there was another guy in the unit. Hey, could you teach me that? And he's like, yeah, sure. And so he taught him, one of the littlest guys in the unit. And so now you have this other guy doing the same thing. And of course they have to shave their heads. Yeah. So they kind of look like he kind of look like a yogi, right? So it spreads throughout the entire unit, and it's just like flipping his basic training officer's mind, right? So all of a sudden he walks in one night to the barracks, and they've all got their shaved heads, and they're all sitting cross-legged on their bunks, right? Because they're all meditating, and he totally flips out. Like he can't believe what's going on, but begrudgingly he understands that there's a there, but he still can't embrace it. And then I think Jan Michael Vincent's character eventually goes AWOL. Like he can't take it anymore. But he used these techniques of meditation and yoga to be able to cope with being in the Marines. It's a really cool movie. And I think you could probably find it on YouTube if you're interested.
Well, I think that there's something to say. I mean, when I train plank pose, plank is very different when you use your breath, you soften your jaw, you have awareness of the weight distribution. There's all these subtle things and hard moments that will transform it, where it becomes, you shift into metacognition and you're able to endure. So right. In a way, I'm sure with the movie framing it as like this weird thing, the reality is that Ranger Battalion uses this stuff, SF uses this stuff. This is all, like all of the high speed type of things this mindfulness is integrated into it, and they call it different, whatever, but it's the same traits. And I think it makes me think of the samurai, right? It's like when we have control over our nervous system, or even going for weapons qualification. I personally enjoy going to the range myself, and be it the way you build proprioception. Yoga helps all these things. So you think about a warrior, it's like the importance of these traits and techniques actually amplify the ability to have trigger control, be able to stay in control when there's a lot of chaos around you, and to recover and regulate. So, from the research that we have today, it's a no-brainer to integrate this stuff into our military. And again, prevent people from being used up and drained and traumatized. Of course, you can have hard experiences in life, but what it does to the nervous system, if we're not regulating and doing, they talk about resilience, building this ability to, deal with pain and then come back to coherence, or to deal with discomfort and come back to coherence, versus just burning them out. And so, it's not about pushing, it's actually about how we work with the energy within our bodies.
So here's a still of Jan Michael Vincent from the movie. Let me just put it up here. So here he is. He's got a shaved head, right? He's meditating. There he is on his bunk. And so the CEO, the basic training officer, right? He comes in and sees all the guys on their beds like this. It's a pretty cool movie. And really brought up kind of a lot of the stuff that and that's what happens with something like the 60s, because yoga, macrobiotics, all the things that are really mainstream now, they were all just taking off then. Like the seeds were being planted then. So a movie like that looks at this from kind of an insider perspective, but then skews it through the eyes of the basic training instructor. But now it's mainstream. Right now you're doing it in the military. So that's a really interesting piece of information that shows us how much we've integrated since then.
Yeah, there's still a lot of work to do, right? Around this stuff. I mean, 10 years ago, definitely did not imagine. I mean, my husband, because I worked with the soldier medics when he was a soldier medic, he could have never imagined that these things would be happening. So, the evolution, it's happening quick, but there's still a lot of work to do. I really believe it's these upcoming soldiers. And then just in our culture, it's upcoming who really start to embrace this stuff so we can change our culture to be more conscious and again, self-agency, right? And connected to our own inner self. Because ultimately, if you're doing things without consciousness, you're just living in pure impulse or reactivity.
Right, exactly. So you and I had a session yesterday, and I looked at your chart, and I'm like, I'm obviously a Western astrology guy, and I'm like, wow, she's got Mars in Leo conjunct Chiron in Leo, which is like the wounded warrior. I'm like, it doesn't get much more, for me, explicit in a chart than an aspect like that. And then you have Venus in Aries and it's conjunct Ceres in your chart, right? And they're enshrined with each other. I'm like, this makes total sense. This is your work. This is your dharma. This is your healing through Chiron. So Chiron is a really interesting subject. And I love talking about Chiron. And Chiron is in Aries right now. And so we are talking about warriors. We are talking about the military. We are talking about the potential to heal. And I mean, if there's any time for you to advance your work, it's a Chiron and Aries moment, right? So like I think you're right on line. And we talked about this yesterday. And I think it's just only going to get better. Jupiter is coming into Aries. So that's greater expansion, more awareness around stuff like this. And, you and I are doing a little interview here on YouTube, and who knows where it goes. Like, we live in a really viral environment, and hopefully, positively viral, and YouTube will view this positively with their algorithms and put it up on, people's recommendation lists and stuff like that. And so this is real. I think it's really interesting and exciting work. Let's talk about the men and women who come back, because some of them are really hurting, really, really hurting. And can you share some of your experiences around kind of the state that I mean, obviously it's going to be different for different people, but the state that they come back in, and do you have a different strategy with working with that group than working with people that are enlisted, like the one that we just saw in that picture?
Yeah, well, the one thing to know is everybody's different, right? So, and I also think part of it, so I'm just going to use an example. I'm going to pull in a little bit of astrology to this as well. Depending on what dasha someone's going through, if there's malefic influences, an experience can be a lot worse than the person they were on it who didn't have those malefic transits happening. So when we look at it from that scope, I believe in all of it, there's a karmic unfolding. There's a higher reason and purpose for why things affect people differently. There's also some factors of it depends on how much that soldier has support. It depends on the soldier's perspective on the experiences that they had. And it also depends on their spiritual hygiene. And the way I describe spiritual hygiene is it's how you get through hard times. It's what do you do to get through hard times? That's how you're going to know what your spiritual hygiene is. And so with those different influences, what I've experienced and seen is there's often either a lot of disassociation, or it can be really empowered, or it can be where it just shuts people off. You got to remember that when you have training environments that are very much go, 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 and this goes to my people out there who love fitness as well, to keep in mind, if you're just go, 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 how often are you disassociating from your body when you're training, whether it's running or working out? So we create a culture of a lot of disassociation, which creates repression, which creates disembodiment, where I'm not even connected to how I'm feeling. And so I see a lot of that. And, that affects our relationships. That affects my ability to have mood modulation or regulate my emotions. And so it depends. But a lot of people who come to me outside of the military, because you got to remember the work I do with the military, we're kind of threading that into training opportunities or into PT or education. So it's a lot of whether it's required or slotted. But then the people who come to me outside of it, right? Usually they're coming because they're asking for either it's one-on-one yoga therapy, so I'm actually a yoga therapist. So providing one-on-one yoga therapy experiences for them to reclaim and reintegrate. And it's never about the story, because the body does not speak the language of story. It speaks the language of sensation. That's why yoga is so great for trauma recovery, is because it's helping remarry the mind and body. It's union, right? I look at trauma is just separation of mind and body. It's a separation. So yoga is the opposite. Or they're wanting to learn more the deeper spiritual components of themselves, and whether it's healing grief or reconciling their experiences, they want to go more into meditations and reconnecting with this deeper essence within. So it's been different for everybody, but I keep in mind that I think that the disembodiment part, and also what has to happen for survival, or when you're in those situations, there is a disconnect that has to happen. So that's where it's like, I think what's appropriate for war is appropriate for war, but what's appropriate for war is not appropriate for home, right? So how do we get them when they come home to be able to reintegrate back into their families, back into their occupational task, whatever? And that's a lot of it's through the body. From what I've seen, it's a lot of work with the body.
Right. So when these people come back, there's inner trauma, psychological, emotional, spiritual trauma. And then there's physical trauma, like things have gone on with their bodies, right? So have you been able to see people who've come back with whatever's happened to them? Have you been able to see and witness improvement and them getting back in touch with their bodies? And what's that like?
Yeah. And so again, it depends. And not everybody, like some people come back and they're great. But I will say that long-term, what I've worked with a lot of veterans is things compound. So, and I think there's a survival element to why, just it compounds and they deal with that later. But with working with, for example, amputees, right? It's one of the big things. And this was when I was working with the Wounded Warrior Project, was when I had more of the privilege to get to work with this community.
Yeah.
It was a lot about learning to rebuild a relationship with the body and feel safe with the body again. Right. Because also too is when we're injured, or if we lose something within ourselves, that is going to reconstruct our entire neural patterning of how the brain and body communicate, even with an injury. So the yoga is really profound for helping people befriend their body again, to be able to rest. Part of the reason people can't sleep or they can't relax is because they can't calm down their nervous system. The mind's disconnected. Right. One thing I've seen is an example of somebody who maybe they were in the pattern. You got to remember, neural patterns happen. So if you're overseas or downrange for 8 months, 6 months, 12 months or more, and there's a pattern of scanning for IEDs, right? Well, when you get home, you're going to have to break out of the pattern of scanning the roads like that. But your brain may say, I'm safe, I'm home, I'm good, but the body's reacting completely different.
Yeah.
And so it's about how do we, and this is where neuroplasticity, this is all because everything we do, there is science behind it. It's really profound to understand the inner workings of the nervous system, but that's really, it's all somatic stuff that I focus on.
Right. So with the conscripted soldiers, they're the ones, they have to do it, right? They can't just say, oh, this is crazy shit, and then walk out. In the wounded warrior side, or people that come back from the battlefront, have you ever had anybody say to you, oh, this is crazy shit, I don't want to do it?
I mean, I think that in a way that happens, and I've experienced that. but also I think that it's just the way that people frame it for themselves.
Yeah.
You know, I also don't really, and I know this is, again, this is just coming from my experience with working with the planets, for example, is nothing like, as humans, we're the ones who go, this is bad, this is good. And absolutely, there is absolute evil, right, in the world.
Yeah.
And then there's absolute light and love. But as far as our relationship to it, that really comes from within ourselves. And even if something was evil or bad or hard, how we're in relationship with it. And because you can't go backwards in time, right? Or if you go, I don't want to do it. You know, the reality is, though, is if you are, you know, if you're not doing your job, you can put the other people you're with in danger, right? So there in that in itself on a deployment, there's, you know, a what is the word, morale that happens of supporting one another. So being mindful of, you know, in the spot in the moment, yes, there's people who freeze. You got to remember, we have the fight, flight, freeze. So that happens. But usually my conversations are happening in hindsight. So you can't go back. It's what it was. But how do we turn that poison into medicine? How do we transform your relationship with that? Because you can't change it. Right. And then what are you integrating in your body to walk forward?
Right. Well, this is all great stuff. And it gives me a lot of hope for what we're doing with our service people. Again, I'm not a, you know, I respect the military. It takes a lot of discipline and a lot of, you know, I got 3 planets of Libra, so I'm not a big war guy, right? I mean, again, if you have to go, you got to defend your family, whatever. I'm good with that. Mars and Cancer, I'm good with that. So I've never been somebody who's, you know, like I've seen people in public see somebody who's wearing a uniform and they'll go, you know, thank you for your service, right? I've never been somebody like that because I'm cynical. But in this case, I want to thank you for your service because you're doing a great job. And I'm sure you've impacted literally thousands of lives. And I have no doubt whatsoever that there's a lot more to come in your story. So thank you for being here and sharing it with us.
What's funny is when you're talking about the chart. So there's been many times where I'm like, I'm done. I think I joked with you, Robert. I just want to do Vedic astrology, or like, I want to, you know, but every time I go, I'm done, something new pulls me back in, you know, and there is this deep, deep love for this work in my soul. It's something that is just so innate in who I am. So I laugh though at time and how it unfolds. It's like when I'm like, all right, I'm done. I get pulled, like there's something that pulls me back in. So I agree that there is something with my chart and the destiny of this, because I've seen this very interesting magnetic thing with it. So
right. Every time you're about to just throw in the towel and say, I'm over, it's just like, no, you're not. You come on back.
They're like, we need you.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, we'll do it one more time. But no, there's a lot to come. And I'm so honored and excited. And just for the opportunities I've had in working with this community, because it's you know, is kind of Scorpio, right? It's hidden. It's there, you know, it has that essence to it, but it is the most profound. And there's so much depth to everybody in the service. And it's a great honor to be up close to it all. So,
right. Yeah. Well, thanks for doing that. And, I know there's going to be some interesting and exciting developments in your life in the next year or two. So when those developments happen, you're coming back on the show.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I wish you and your family a great holiday, and you take good care of yourself.
You as well. I love the Christmas decorations. They're
this is actually a storefront from the 1950s.
Wow, that's very detailed in there.
Right.
Well, I hope everybody has an amazing Christmas, and thank you for having me on. It's a true privilege to share this stuff.
Yeah, you're welcome. We'll see you down the line, Melissa.
All right, talk soon. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. All right, so there you go. Again, I'm not a big war guy, right? But you have to respect somebody like that who has dedicated their life to helping these people, both going in and then coming out, and doing it with such attention to detail in love, right? So, you know, mad respect. And hopefully what happens is that, these roots of consciousness start to grow with some of our people that come through, and then they matriculate upwards, and they get into the CO ranks, and they're like, we got other ways of dealing with this. We have other ways of dealing with this conflict. We have other ways in which we can deal with the administrative side of things, and then employ that spiritual and emotional intelligence, and then really begin to shift how we interact with conflict in general. Because the conflict isn't really one country with another country, right? I mean, there is that when you're there and boots on the ground. The conflict really exists at the heart of an organization, right? That's where it exists. And it exists also in the minds and the pocketbooks of people inside the military industrial complex. They need conflict. They need conflict to keep their businesses up and running and booming. But if you have a wave of people that matriculate into a position where they see that differently, then maybe, fingers crossed, we might have some change in that direction, in that area. And even dealing with governmental agencies are also connected to the military. And one hopes that a particular type of consciousness can spread like wildfire, and we can deal with these things from a higher perspective, much higher perspective. So mad props and respect to Melissa. All right. I think that's really about it for today. I'm not going to go into any dark matter or take you down any rabbit holes, which was my original plan. But I did want to play something before we go. I found this song and I shut down all these windows. Let me see if I can find it again. It's one of these songs. I think it fits for today's show, because there's an interesting cross-cultural synthesis in this song. Here it is right here. I'm gonna take you guys out on this song. And being that it's at the end of the track here, or at the end of the track, the end of the show, if for some reason I have to edit it out for a copyright claim, it'll be at the end. But it's kind of cool. All right, so I found this song, and it is a Tibetan Christmas song. So we're talking something that is hopefully in the public domain. But these guys that are playing this song are not Tibetan, they're Western. And they're singing the song with Western lyrics. So this is an interesting synthesis of Tibetan Buddhism, Christianity, Christmas, and I guess what do they call it now? International music. We used to call it world music. I think it's called international music now. All right, so here we go. It's called Gowala Jabala, Tibetan Christmas song with English lyrics. Let's have a listen.
Gibala, Gawala, Gibala. From the fields came shepherds, Gawala, shepherds sang their praise songs, Gibala, Gawala, Gibala. Came wise men, Gawala, offering gold and silver, Gibala, Gawala, Gibala. Angels fill the heavens, Gawala, singing songs of gladness, Gibala, Gawala, Gibala, Gawala, Gibala. Let's go. The day of joy has risen, Gawala, songs of beauty founding, Gibala, Gawala, Gibala, Gawala, Gibala. Ibeni bashar song, Gawala, Yembeluya song, Gibala, Gawala, Gibala, Gawala, Gibala, Gawala, Gibala.
All right. Well, it turned into a real banger there at the end, didn't it? Pretty cool tune. Thanks for being here. I'll be back on Sunday night Astro Live, right here on the very same channel you're viewing this show on. And until then, have yourself a great weekend. And you know the drill. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to step in what's possible. Thanks again to Melissa Aguirre for being here today, being such a great guest. And thanks to my buddy right here, the Astro Cat, adding his support, his constant support. Mods, thank you for being here. Chataria, love you. And I'll see you guys on Sunday night. Take care. Bye for now.